welcome to this week's In Conversation, in which I talk to people in the Northeast dynamic and exciting cybersecurity industry. My name is Phil Jackman, and I lead on CyberNorth, Dynamo Northeast Cybersecurity Cluster, supported by Accenture and the Innovation Super Network. We're recognized by DCMS and the National Cybersecurity Centre as representing the region. Today, I'm joined by Andrew Waite, Information Security Consultant, InfoSanity Research. Hi, Andrew. How are you doing?
Hi, Phil. I'm not so bad, thanks. How about yourself?
Yeah, not bad at all. So, could you please start by telling us a bit about yourself and your role at InfoSanity?
Yeah, certainly. As you said, I'm a IT security professional, and InfoSanity has become sort of my personal vehicle for all of my personal projects that can't get sort of related back to my actual employer. Given some of the stuff I've played with malware, attack systems, incident response. So unsurprisingly, some of those personal projects, my employers get a little, shall we say, uncomfortable getting directly attached to themselves. So InfoSanity spun up as a result of that, and for the last decade or so, it's sort of been that research and consultancy platform in the background away from day-to-day employment.
So I imagine the employers get some benefit from those extracurricular activities as well.
I've definitely learned quite a bit as a result, but yeah, they get a bit nervous until we know what the result is. It's always safer to keep the two separate, I've found.
Indeed, indeed. So you've been in security almost since you started working. What was it attracted to you as a career?
It's hard to say. I've always been sort of an IT person. I was fortunate enough for my generation, there was always a computer in the house, which wasn't always the case for my friends and family. I've been interested in security pretty much for as long as I knew it existed. I think I bought my first book on hacking from Waterstones back when books were physical, probably when I was about 10 years old. It was always interesting to me. But equally, I kind of assumed that because it was interesting to me, it's going to be interesting to everybody else, and the best of the best will want to do it. So I went into the industry kind of as a broader developer, sort of admin type role was where I started out. And then I found through my career that actually there's a lot of IT people want nothing to do with the security side. It's not what makes them interested. So I kind of took it on. I started getting given the jobs that nobody else wanted to do, which helpfully matched exactly what I wanted to do. And my career has just gone from there as I've had the opportunity to get my hands dirty with some of the security problems along the way.
Excellent, excellent. It takes all sorts to make a world, but I gather you started at Onyx while studying for your degree. Was this part of a supported program?
It wasn't. I started in my placement year intentionally as part of a 4-year degree at Northumbria. The third year was meant to be a working placement, which was good. That all went to plan. For various reasons lost to history now, and I'll not bore you with, I ended up staying with Onyx for far longer than the 10 months that was meant to be. And I ended up finishing my final year of my degree course whilst also working full time with some fairly heavy out of hours and on-call duties, which is definitely not something I would recommend. That was not a fun year of my life, but it resulted at the end of that with spending about a decade at Onyx, continuously from there, learning my trade and sort of establishing where I wanted to be in my career. So whilst that year was very, very painful, it was definitely worthwhile.
Excellent, excellent. So, but after you left Onyx, you seem to have had a number of much shorter term roles. Well, shorter term roles. Was this a deliberate choice you made? What the experience and skills for you, or was this just the way the market was going?
It certainly wasn't deliberate. It's not something I've set out to do. I've always quite liked sort of finding a home in an environment that I'm used to. The fact I spent 10 years in my first role probably attributes that quite a bit. But equally, I'm finding the market and the industry as a whole, especially in security, is advancing that much that staying in one job for a long time sort of doesn't happen. Even though I spent a long time at Onyx, I had sort of 3 or 4 separate roles in that time. And similarly, by the time I've left even previous jobs after a couple of years, the job that I'm doing at the end of that 2 years has been very different to the one I was originally hired for. So I am finding a better turnaround, although for my own personal preference, I do like having some slightly longer tenure. The idea of a 3-month contract job sounds like the stuff of nightmares to me. So hopefully I'll find a long-term home at some point again.
It's kind of a continuous progression in the same role, but in different jobs.
Yeah, certainly. Just moving around up and down the ranks, and similarly just finding what I liked. I started off, I found the offensive side of security fascinating, going down sort of the pen test role, and I did that for a couple of years inside Onyx alongside different roles. And I found that whilst it's really interesting, that's not the job I wanted to do professionally. So my last few roles have been stepping back towards the blue team and being more defensive and admin rather than the adversarial offensive side of security.
That's really interesting, Andrew. I'm sorry we're kind of dwelling on this question, but the blue side seems to be the less glamorous end of the market, but it's actually one of the ones we need most.
Yeah, it is. It's got the reputation that that's the boring stuff. If you look at sort of all the conferences, and there's plenty of them in security, the offensive stuff, the hacking, the stuff that ends up in movies, often badly portrayed, but it's the stuff that most people find more interesting. And I don't know whether that's the case more generally, but for me, I found it was interesting, and it is interesting, but doing it professionally, I found quite tiring and repetitive. Where on the blue side, for me, it's that desire. I get to actually build something rather than just break it down, and I can be responsible for my systems and take pride in what I'm doing rather than just poking holes and giving everybody else a nightmare after a 2-week engagement to poke holes in their baby instead.
And you also have to live with the consequences of what you've designed, in effect.
There is, in hindsight, that's probably a negative, but it's much easier to throw a couple of hand grenades after a week's work and walk away to the next job. There's always the chance on the blue side that you end up having to explain what went wrong on the front of a BBC News camera, but that just comes with the territory. We've got to try to make sure that doesn't happen as much as possible.
Excellent, excellent. So you've recently taken on a role as Matillion, which I think is a Cheshire-based company. How's your onboarding experience been there?
That's something that really made me nervous when I started. I've always stayed local. I've always stayed where I've had offices, nice and easy, and remote working is entirely new to me. I don't know whether it was misplaced fears in remote working that weren't correct, or whether I've just been fortunate that I've had a fantastic onboarding experience. But everything with Matillion, it's been smooth, nice and easy, getting up to speed. I'm still only, I think this is my week number 10, so I'm still relatively new through the door. But so far, I'd have no complaints. It's definitely been far, far better than I feared. And in all fairness, it's probably gone smoother than I could have hoped for. So onboarding for a remote role, I wouldn't have those same concerns again when I come to take a next step, hopefully quite a way down the line.
So life has changed considerably with COVID, and there's many more people working remotely. And so I guess what you're saying is it makes it much easier to get those roles outside the region if that's what you wanted to do.
Possibly, I couldn't say it's definitely made it easier. I've definitely had colleagues and peers that have gone on to remote working, and they've been quite comfortable in that sort of work pattern for many, many years before COVID. But for myself, I always preferred the idea of having an office and remote working was something when the opportunities come up, that's been something that's made me decide against an opportunity. I guess for me, the change in COVID was when this opportunity came up for Matillion. I was already working remotely from my home office. Everybody else was doing the same. So if there was ever an opportunity for me to try remote working and see if it was as good or as bad as I potentially feared, now was the opportunity to take that chance. So I've jumped in with both feet. And as I said, so far, those fears have been misplaced. So I'm quite happy.
Excellent. So in your time in security, how's the threat landscape changed, and where do you think the biggest threats are going to come from in the future?
It's changed, and it's the bit I love about security is it's always changing. There's always that new threat. You never quite know when you wake up whether or not there's going to be a new thing that's going to completely derail your plans. But I think fundamentally, from what I've seen, looking back at the bigger picture, the problems haven't really changed. The specifics have, but fundamentally, I find security, the biggest problem is observability. You need to know what's on your network, what's running where, who's doing what. You can't secure what you don't know about, and equally from a defensive side, you can't respond to events that you can't see. So whilst the specifics have changed, observability is still the foundation of everything from security, from what I've seen. But equally, the move sort of a few years ago from on-premise to the cloud started the journey where the perimeter wasn't a perimeter anymore. And I think the move with COVID to remote working for just about everybody, it's the final nail in the coffin. Whilst the perimeter hasn't been a perimeter for many years, a few people that were still clinging to the preference that we could still do the old castle and moat, that there's no excuses for any of that. It's out in the open. Everything's distributed networks now. So maintaining that visibility of what's going on when you don't have one central office to run your one point of network sniffing through just changes the game a bit.
And I guess with what we've learned from SolarWinds is that the next biggest threat is probably going on right now.
Yeah, quite possibly. I don't like picking on individual ones, but the SolarWinds has definitely been an interesting one. And it's always been that piece of the puzzle, kind of the observability. Even companies, from my experience, that have done security well, their visibility of their supply chain has always been iffy. Some have done it better than others. Some haven't done it at all from places I've seen. But the SolarWinds one show that even, there's the old adage that nobody ever got sacked for buying an IBM. The SolarWinds has just shown that even some of the biggest names in security can have security problems. And the bigger they get, the more impact it has on the rest of us as and when they do have problems come to light.
Indeed, indeed. So you were involved in BSide 2019 at the skate park in Gated, I think, and presumably all that's gone now. So that I've just had to pivot online. Are there plans to hold one this year as part of Cyberfest again?
I think so. I'll admit I got roped into helping set up the first one at very short notice. It seemed nobody mentioned that we were going to do it inside 9 weeks. When I agreed to get involved, that was terrifying. But equally, if you manage to get involved in a security conference where you sat on the top of a half pipe listening to a keynote speech, I don't think I'm going to forget that anytime soon. Last year was one of the main impacts to me as a result of COVID, and that I stepped away from planning it last year. Just because with everything else going on, a couple of young children, homeschooling, I didn't have the time. This time round, I'm really hoping that I'm able to get back involved and keep that up and running. I suspect that if we do get anything running, it's going to be online again. But it'll be really good. I know Ben, the main driver behind setting up all of the BSide stuff, he's always got 101 ideas in his head, so I'm sure there will be something, although I just absolutely can't guess what form that's going to take at the moment, because Ben's always coming out of left field, like a security conference in the middle of a skate park.
So I've written it down on my list of events for Cyberfest 21, so which is going to take place in September. My last question then for you. Look, this has been a very challenging year for all of us. What are your hopes in terms of the future?
My initial hope, as you can see, is I would like to be able to get the barbers sometime soon, because this is starting to get ridiculous. But in all seriousness, in terms of the year, I'll be really good. The fact I've got my kids back to school, I'm hoping that marks the start of the recovery and keeps going. Professionally, obviously, I've just changed jobs, so being able to keep providing value to my new employer and not make them regret the fact they hired me in the first place. But swinging back around to your first question, I really hope that by the end of this year, outside pressures have reduced as they've impacted everybody, and I can get back to doing some of those side projects which make my employers really, really nervous, and start producing a bit more research and hopefully some new tools that everybody else can play with and make their employers nervous as a result as well.
Well, we'll look forward to that. Well, thanks very much for that, Andrew. I'd also like to thank Robert Campbell, who's helped me to set up these in conversations. Look out for the next series. And if you're interested in taking part, please get in touch. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you very much.
That was In Conversation with Phil Jackman, lead for CyberNorth. Audio and video production was by me, Robert Campbell. This was a Team Funds production for Dynamo Northeast.